What's up, heathens? How ya doing? Today we're talking with Chris Shelton, who used to be a Scientologist. And to be quite honest, I have no idea what Scientology is. And I've tried to figure it out by watching their videos, still haven't figured it out. as Chris will tell you, it's kind of hard to get into it. But anyways, we're going to be talking to Chris today. Chris, you want to say hi?
Yo, hey everybody.
So we're going to be talking with Chris, an ex-Scientologist, today about, his whole past with Scientology and what brought him out of it. So if you're interested in that, then please stay tuned. All right, so thank you, Chris, for being here today. I really appreciate you getting up early because you're about an hour behind me. And I know at first I was like, hey, how about we do it at this time? And he's like, that's early for me. I'm like, shit, I forgot people don't get up at 5 a.m. like me.
Got that right. Yeah, 5 a.m. don't exist on my calendar. My clock. Nope.
To be honest, I wish it didn't exist on my on my particular schedule either, but
Well, we do what we got to do. I get it.
So, why don't you start off by telling us, where did you start off with Scientology? Were your parents Scientologists, or did you hear about it and you just started believing it?
Yeah, no, I'm what's called a second gen, and this is actually second generation cult member is actually becoming a recognized thing in the world of psychology and sociology because this has become it's only been in the last few years that we've been differentiating how people get into these groups. And when you're raised in these high control groups like Scientology, then it's a whole different kettle of fish from if you walk in one day when you're 26, 27 years old and are making your own independent decisions about it. So I'm a second gen member, and so I was raised with Scientology. I never knew any world outside of it as far as the concepts or the ideas or being raised with it. And that's really saying that it's not a whole lot different from being raised in a Christian household or a Jewish household or Islamic household. You're just raised with these ideas, and you never think most people, I will say, would never think to question this. It comes from your parents. All their friends are Scientologists. Everybody around you is Scientologists. I'll tell you something funny. I find this endlessly funny. When I was 10 years old, somebody outside of our circle, I think I was watching a movie or something, and my mom was there, and somebody used the word communicate or communication. And this is a big word for a 10-year-old, right? Communication, right? And the only people I had ever heard use that word were Scientologists because communication is kind of a big thing in Scientology. And I looked at my mom and I went, how do they know that word? And my mom was like, that's just a regular word. And I was like, it is? That's not a Scientology word, and she laughed and laughed. So I had some confusions between what was the Scientology world and what was the real world growing up. And that's kind of my point with that, little anecdote. But it was an interesting existence growing up with Scientology. So that's how I came across it. And then I sort of did, I was kind of in and out of the churches as far as my involvement with it until I was about 15 years old. I wasn't really doing Scientology. I was just around it. And when I was 15 years old, my dad said, hey, why don't you go down to the local church and check it out for yourself? Right. And I was like, okay, because I do everything my dad says. And I dutifully went down there, and I didn't expect it to be a big thing. Actually, I was in high school at the time, 15 years old. So this was in the summer between sophomore and junior year in high school. Went down there, did their personality test. And in this way, my experience was a lot like anybody else's who comes in. You come in, you do this 200 question personality survey or test or whatever you want to call it. It's really just a bunch of hokum. I mean, they literally made this test up out of whole cloth back in the 50s. There's nothing scientific about it. It has nothing to do with Oxford. They call it the Oxford Capacity Analysis. This is just the beginning. I mean, right from the beginning, they're lying, right? This is kind of my point here, right? Is we're right from the very beginning, the Oxford Capacity Analysis, the OCA, right? The personality test. And you do this test, you get this graph, it comes out with, nice little scientific looking lines and charts and stuff. But the point of this test is to sit you down and get you talking, telling them about yourself. It's like I call it like a warm reading. You're giving some data, but you're not giving a lot of data. And they're asking you questions and soliciting information from you because they're trying to find your ruin, the thing that's ruining your life that you think you have a huge problem with that you need to solve or deal with interpersonal relations, communication, school, work, kids, whatever it is, your ruin. And once they get that ruin, then they mash it in your face, try to convince you how horrible and awful it is and how it's ruining your life. And you must do something about it right now. You walked in here, you took this test. Clearly, you're looking for something. People don't just walk in here for no reason, right? They say. So everything then is tuned to getting you to realize that the law of attraction is basically in play right now. You have pulled this in. You have come to us. You have, you're looking for something. You have this ruin in your life. Well, guess what? Today is the luckiest day of your life because you came into a Church of Scientology, and we have classes and counseling services that will deal with that ruin. And that's how you join. That's how you sign up. You go, well, I want this handled. And if you guys can do something for me for $50 for a $50 course or $100 for some, an hour or two of some counseling, and you can do something for me, that's not a big investment. I can, sure, I can scrape that together. I can go dig around in my couch, get the money out, borrow it, get it on a card, whatever I need to do, because this is my ruin, right? I got to handle this. For me, 15 years old, right? Sophomore, junior in high school, I couldn't talk to girls at all. I could not get a date, had not had one, right? I was just totally bashful, nerdy, geeky guy. And I was this small, runty little guy, and I didn't have any real or initiative. I was very backed off from talking to girls. And they said, well, we have a class that can handle that. And I just about fell out of my chair. You do? What? And I thought they were reading me in a way that was somehow psychic or something. I mean, if you see pictures of me as a 15-year-old, you're going to instantly go, oh, that guy. Yeah, of course he didn't have any dates, right? I had these big glasses and I just walked around reading books all the time. And of course, I wasn't a social person. So they say, well, you take this class in communication and we'll deal with that. We'll handle that. You'll be able to talk to girls. You'll be able to do this, do that, do the other thing. And I was like, sign me up, shut up and take my money, right? You couldn't do it fast enough. And so I started doing classes. And that was the beginning of my 27 years of the next 20, I spent the next 27 years hardcore. 2 years I was finishing high school, was going to go to college, was going to be a writer, was planning, that was my career trajectory. And instead, when I was 17, right out of high school, I'd been going to Santa Barbara, taking classes, and then they called me up and they were like, yeah, we really want to talk to you about working here. And I said, what? And after 3 days of some pretty intense love bombing and showing me all these quotes from L. Ron Hubbard about the state of the world and how bad it was and how everything was going to hell in a handbasket, and Scientology was the beacon of light that was going to bring truth and justice and prosperity to everybody. And I really bought it. I'm sad to say that their sales pitch to get me on staff didn't just work a little bit, it worked great. And I was totally sold on saving the world. And I thought Scientology was going to be the thing that was going to do that. So I went from an individual who was doing Scientology services as what we call a public Scientologist, pay for the services, do the things, right? But you still have a regular life. I went from that to being a staff member, which is sort of the next level up. Scientology has about 110 or something city-level churches around the world. Santa Barbara, and this is how they're referred to: the Santa Barbara organization, the Los Angeles organization, the Denver organization, the Milano organization. So this is how they are identified. So I call them city-level churches. They call them orgs, short for organization. They don't call them churches. They call them orgs. And there's a reason for that we will probably get into. And because the religion angle is really only a public front. It's a PR thing. It's not something they really take very seriously within the church. If they're talking to you who's a non-Scientologist, they'll take it very seriously. They'll tell you it's a religion, crosses, Sunday services, all this stuff. But when you get into the world of Scientology, you find out, religion, schmidgen, whatever. We're doing Scientology. We do that so we get tax exemption, and they leave us alone in the courts. That's why it's a religion, right? And people in Scientology don't pay a lot of attention to that.
Right. Well, I was going to ask, like, before becoming a staff member, what and after you had done that initial visit to the church, I mean, what was it like being, I guess, a public Scientologist? Because like, just listening to what you were talking about here, that's vastly different from like my experience in like a Christian church, because the Christian church, they'll provide those services like for free. I mean, yeah, they kind of want donations on Sunday and everything like that, but it's not like, oh, to come to church you got to pay like $50 fee or something. They always provide kind of services, because like that's what the whole tax exemption thing is supposed to be about, is like providing services for the community. But it seems like Scientology is just like, hey, we got a class, it's only $50 to take the class, kind of thing. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what was your experience like when you were, I guess, a public Scientologist?
Sure. That's a good question, actually. Nobody's ever really asked me that question directly in all these years. As a public Scientologist, I was subject to a lot of pressure. That's mainly what goes on at the public level, is that you are pressured to a hard sold, right? There's hard sell. There's like, it's like crush selling, right? They want your money, and they are not bashful about getting it, because they think Scientology staff members are totally true believers. They are not con men. They don't think that they're selling you snake oil. They really believe in what they're doing. It's only at the highest levels that they start having recognition that maybe something's wrong. So they are convinced that they're saving the world, and they want you on board. And so there I was, this, impressionable 15, 16-year-old, get my own car, start driving down there by myself. I'm doing classes. I do this communications class. I did a study class. I did a survey of Scientology class. I took a class about the e-meter, so I learned how to use that. Which is its own conversation, and various other little classes, right? And I was just sort of at an ethics class. I mean, they got all kinds. They got hundreds of classes, and it runs like a business. It doesn't run like a church. And that's the key thing you find out real fast, is that you're being sold services. You're being sold counseling by the hour, or blocks of hours, 12.5-hour blocks. And it is being sold. The terminology is donations, not purchasing, right? You purchase books, you purchase lectures, they sell you all the materials. And when you're doing various courses, there are some materials that are required for those courses. You're expected to buy them. They have them there in their library. They have a library in these orgs, but you don't get to just go partake of the library. You have to purchase the materials as you go. And there's dictionaries, and there's lots of materials. And of course, there's the e-meters, and you're supposed to buy your own e-meters too. You're actually supposed to buy 2 of them. So
wait, why 2?
Because the meters are about $5,000 a pop. By the way, the e-meter costs about $20 for them to make, something like that. Yeah, I mean the markup's unreal.
Right. Well, I mean, like, for the e-meter, isn't it just like 2 wires like taped to like some kind of box, and it's like got a metal pipe or something? Is it 1 metal pipe, or is it 2 metal pipes? I can't remember.
It's 2. It's cans that you hold in your hands. They're electrodes. And
basically like Wii remotes or the Switch controllers.
Yeah, kind of. They're like, I mean, originally they were soup cans.
They were originally soup cans?
Soup cans. They're metal because they conduct. Right.
So let me propose this. L. Ron Hubbard's in his kitchen, like, yeah, sure. Haven't you ever seen an e-meter? I'll just make one real quick. Hold on, let me MacGyver this shit.
Well, a chiropractor guy made it for him. Like I said, there's a whole conversation here. The meter is its own subject, right? And it's total bunk and it's just nonsense. But basically, the short and accurate description of the e-meter is it's 1/3 of a polygraph. A polygraph is multiple. There's three things going on with a polygraph. That's why they call it a polygraph. And one of those things is measuring skin resistance. It's a skin galvanometer, right? It measures resistance to an electrical flow that's going across the surface of your skin. And that is one of the things that can measure endocrine levels, parasympathetic nervous system, muscle tension. This is reflected in skin resistance. It's not a reliable indicator of anything mentally. Psychology gave up on this. I mean, Jung studied this back in the late 1800s. He gave it up. He said, this is ridiculous. It's totally random. And that's pretty much what Scientology uses is this thing. And they call it an electropsychometer or an e-meter. So Hubbard didn't invent it. Hubbard just had somebody else invented it at his suggestion of a device they could create that might help them out. And this guy went and invented it. And then Hubbard basically ran with it. The guy wouldn't sell him his patent, so Hubbard eventually stopped using the meter. And then a Scientologist came to him in 1956 and said, I've got a way to make the meter and we'll put your name on it and it'll be your invention. And that's been the Hubbard e-meter or electropsychometer ever since then. And meters came back in full force. So it's all about the Benjamins. If you look at the history of this, you see a trail of people assisting Hubbard eventually betraying them and using their work to his advantage, their ideas to his advantage. He was pretty shameless as a plagiarist. So you see an ongoing, history of that if you look into the history of Scientology. But I get ahead of myself a little bit here.
So why did they require you to buy two of those? Because that seems like a pretty hefty investment. Like $10,000 just for those two things?
It became a rule, basically a tradition based on the original e-meters, which were not so reliable as electronic devices. They were literally they were handmade. They were putting these things together, and they still are to a great degree. And they were not very reliable. I mean, this is the 1950s we're talking about. Transistors hadn't even been invented yet. And so they fell apart. They stopped working all the time. So you needed to have a backup meter. So if you're in the middle of a session with somebody, the big rule in auditing and in counseling, they call it auditing. So I'll start calling it auditing because it really shouldn't be called counseling. It's not really that. It's its own thing. So I'll call it what it is, which is auditing. And in auditing in Scientology, they don't want those sessions interrupted. You're supposed to just be doing these processes, and they're very fixed processes. They're very exact questions asked in a very exact sequence, and the meter is part of the deal. The meter tells you what questions to ask and whether you're getting it's what the needle responds to that tells you what to do in the session. So if the meter breaks down, your session's basically fucked, right? Pardon my French. So you have to have a backup. I mean, you have to have that there ready. So if this goes dead, you're ready to keep going. And on that tradition, a rule was formed in the organization that everybody buys 2 meters. And originally this was, these meters were selling back in the 50s for, $10, $15, something like that. Now they're $5,000. I mean, there's this insane markup, and the church just makes tons of money on that. So that's why.
Okay. So getting back to you as a public Scientologist, so you were taking all of these courses and you had to invest the money to get the 2 e-meters. How did you do that? Do they provide loan services?
I should be clear. I did not buy 2 meters as a public person.
Okay.
I could not afford that as a 17-year-old kid. No way. I had to sell my car in order to pay for those courses. Because I bought a $900 package as my first set of courses, which is unusual. Most people start at the $50 services, but my parents were Scientologists. I was already kind of convinced that this stuff was working, and my parents had benefited from it. And the big thing in Scientology, one of the principles that they use to guilt you into giving more money is the concept of exchange. Hubbard was big on exchange. He wrote a policy letter called Exchange. And my parents raised me with this. So, if I wanted money from my parents growing up, it wasn't, hey, give me some money. It was looking around and figuring out what could I do that would earn me money, right? Can I wash your car? Can I go mow the lawn? Chores, this kind of stuff, right? This was how I was raised. So when I started doing Scientology classes, I didn't have $900. I was working at Burger King. I didn't know how to save $900. So, and my parents, I'd gotten my first car from my parents. It was our, old VW Bug that they'd had since 1960, so as old as I was. And they gave it to me, and that was awesome. For my 16th birthday, I got a car. Woo, and I sold it to do these classes, and pay my parents back because they paid for the courses, and I needed to pay them back. So that's how I did it. And they loved me, but they thought that this exchange thing was very important, and that in Scientology, it's a big principle. So I sold my car, got the courses. Somehow got rides and stuff back and forth. And it was just a lot of pressure as a public person to come in as often as possible. I was supposed to be doing classes. The schedule was supposed to be minimum 15 hours a week. So I was there all day Sunday and Monday nights and Tuesday nights. And then when I started at the very end, when I was when I finished high school and I was just getting ready to start going to college, I did a program called the Purification Program, which is a sauna detox. Total bunk, complete pseudoscience. I've done an entire video debunking this purification program. But, at the time, I thought it was real, and I thought you could sweat out toxins. And Hubbard had this whole theory about how you spend hours in a sauna and you take mega doses of these vitamins and niacin, and this will detox your body. Well, Hubbard was dead wrong, and people have actually died doing this program, but I didn't know any of that at the time. So that's a daily program. I was going every single day for 5 hours a day doing this program. And that's when they started recruiting me, because I was a captive audience. I was in the sauna, and then I'd come out at the end of the day after 5 hours of being pretty wasted. I mean, 5 hours in the sauna, even for a young 17-year-old who was in pretty good shape, that's weird. That's wearing, that's tiring. And then they would lay into me and start showing me all these references and from Hubbard about the state of the world and how everything was going to hell, and love bombing me at the same time. You're so great. There's nothing better for a 17-year-old boy, I think. Never gotten laid, didn't have a girlfriend, didn't know anything about any of that stuff yet. And here's this beautiful blonde woman, right, who works at the church, who is like, kind of, as far as my eyes go, is like supermodel category. And she's telling me how amazing I am. I'm sitting there in this chair going, wow, and she's like, oh, I want to work with you. I think it would be great if you were here. You're so special. I mean, look at how many people out in the world, and you're going to go to college. Well, college, smallage. Lots of people go to college. Is the world a better place because of college graduates? No, the world's only going to be a better place because of us. Scientology, we're the ones who are changing the world, not them. They're making the world worse. I mean, college graduates are the ones who came up with nuclear bombs. College graduates are the one who design all this stuff, right? I mean, these are the lines they use, right? They're subtle, little, they're not subtle, but they sound convincing when you're in a certain frame of mind, right? And they're very good at creating circumstances to put you in an amenable state of mind, where L. Ron Hubbard is the genius, savior of the world. He's invented this technique, he discovered this, this set of rules and technology. They call it technology, for saving the world, for saving every one of us, for every single person can achieve personal spiritual freedom and immortality.
Yeah, it's odd because that's what I see a lot of fundamentalist churches, like Christian churches, do is they denigrate the idea of going to college.
Yep.
And they say that that's going to pull you away from God. Like going to college is going to make you go away. But it's kind of I don't know. Do you know much about L. Ron Hubbard history?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you know about him and Jack Parsons?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard was an occultist and practiced black magic, sex magic before developing Dianetics and Scientology this was in the mid 1940s in Pasadena, California, which is actually the town I grew up in. I grew up 5 minutes away from where L. Ron Hubbard was practicing sex magic. I used to deliver papers around that area. Not when he was doing it, because he was doing it in the 40s, right? And I grew up in this, in the 80s, but it was just kind of funny to me geographically.
I mean, hearing you talk about how they would portray L. Ron Hubbard as this genius and how he's developed this amazing technology that's going to, save the world and everything, I can't help but to think back to this video I did where I was refuting this guy called A Call for an Uprising. He was suggesting that apparently Area 51 was this place where a demon goddess was brought into this world, right? By L. Ron Hubbard. Yeah, well, by L. Ron Hubbard. But when you say sex magic, I really don't think people understand what was actually happening, because what actually happened was that L. Ron Hubbard watched Jack Parsons jerk off on a bunch of rocks, and he did that 3 times.
Yeah, it's possible that there was also homosexual activity and ritual magic involving even some amounts of blood as well as semen and stuff. Yeah, it's really pretty weird stuff.
Oh yeah, and it blew my mind because when I started doing that video, I was like, there's no way this is real. There's no way this crazy shit happened. And then it's I go on a historical hunt, to find historical evidence for any of this stuff happening. And then I get this article where it's oh yes, L. Ron Hubbard watched Jack Parsons jerk off on a pile of stones in the middle of the desert. I'm like, oh shit, really?
Yep. He
L.
really
Ron
did.
Hubbard, you say?
That's right. It's sometimes in some areas of Scientology, of these groups, and especially when you get into the occult, truth is stranger than fiction. And people do get up to stuff in this world, not just in Scientology, but people get up to some stuff that's pretty outrageous, and our social veneer can get a little thin. In some places, people get up to some pretty crazy stuff in this world, and I think people are only now starting to really start to get how depraved certain elements of our society, including the 1%, can get. I mean, people start getting power and privilege, and they start thinking some pretty strange things about what they can and can't do to other people, and that's what happens. And in Scientology is very elitist. It creates narcissism, and it pushes that off, because you're creating what you want to do in what cult leaders want to do in cults is they want to make their followers into little mini versions of them, and the followers adopt the personality traits of the leader, because they want to emulate them, because they venerate or worship or look up to or admire these cult leaders. And in Scientology, for example, you get phrases like, what would Ron do? If faced with this problem, what would Ron do? Right? That's how you're supposed to model your behavior.
What would Ron do? Watch some guy jerk off on some rocks?
Yeah, exactly, right? But also, let's be clear. Let's be super clear that I didn't know a thing about L. Ron Hubbard's occult practices until after I got out of Scientology. None of that. They don't talk about any of that stuff. They deny all of it. Or they say they actually couldn't deny it because it's such historical fact. It's so documented they couldn't. But what they do is they say L. Ron Hubbard was sent in there by the police to break up a satanic ring, right? And he was responsible for saving a girl and breaking up the satanic ring, right, is what the church claims. The fact of the matter is L. Ron Hubbard went in, conned Jack Parsons, stole his girl, stole his money, and left him, right, and took off, because that's what L. Ron Hubbard did. And that was how he was. And this was all pre-Dianetics. So this is all, at the time, there's no internet, there's no newspapers covering this. L. Ron Hubbard wasn't a huge public figure. So nobody knew that this had been going down. And L. Ron Hubbard was able to rewrite his own history when Dianetics took off and was big, and he didn't mention any of that stuff. So,
well, didn't L. Ron Hubbard also lie about his military service?
Yes, he was a pathological liar. I mean, seriously, I don't use that term loosely. I mean, he seriously was. The guy would lie about stuff he never had to lie about. He said that this was actually one of the key debunks of Dianetics. L. Ron Hubbard debunks it himself. The truth of L. Ron Hubbard's life debunks it, because he said, as a lieutenant in the Navy, he commanded 2 different vessels at 2 different times, lost his command both times, screwed it up entirely, never saw actual combat in World War II. Yet he claimed that at the end of the war, he was suffering from war wounds and had to convalesce at Oak Knoll Naval Hospital for a year before he went down to Pasadena and met Jack Parsons. And he didn't, but he claimed that he did, right? He claimed he was blind, he was paralyzed, he was this, he was that. And Dianetics, he developed Dianetics procedure while convalescing in the hospital. He experimented on other patients with it. It was just talk therapy, right? And got them better from their war wounds, healed himself. And that was how he hit on the principles of Dianetics, as he figured it all out by studying endocrinology and studying psychology and this and that. It's all a lie. None of that happened. None of that happened, like literally at all. And then he shows up in Pasadena, does this occult stuff, learns about Aleister Crowley's whole, Freemason-like structure of levels and guided initiations and ascended masters. And I mean, this goes back to early 1900 New Age stuff. And this was the thing in the 50s, post-World War II, this stuff was cropping up all over the place. New Age was literally new at that time. And all this, and so the whole country was kind of on this role of self-help and personal, that sort of thing. And Dianetics comes in and tries to get in on that, and does. It becomes a bestseller and it's huge. But it was based on hypnotism. Hubbard was a hypnotist. I don't know where he learned it. We don't know that part, but we do know that he was accomplished and he knew what he was doing when it comes to hypnotizing people. And so he combined that and some old debunked psychotherapy. And then he said it wasn't any of that. It's not hypnotism. It's waking you up. It's not putting you to sleep. That's kind of nonsense, right? And, and Dianetics takes off. But it was actually based on this earlier stuff that he had been working on and doing without giving any, not even not giving any credit to. It was such unsavory stuff Hubbard was involved in. He didn't want that to be public knowledge. So he lied about it all. And Dianetics supposedly being based on a method that he cured himself with, and that's how he knows it works. Well, if that's all a lie, and none of that ever happened, and Hubbard was never really wounded and never really cured himself, then the entire basis of Dianetics is a total lie. And guess what? It is a total lie. So that's the history on that.
But I'm so sorry I got you off from your story.
No.
Okay. So going back, though, they were love bombing you and, feeling they had you in this very suggestive state and telling you all these things, which, I mean, as you were talking about that, I was like, it just sounds like some pretty heavy manipulation to convince you to do what they wanted you to do. So after that point, is that when you started seriously considering like becoming a staff member, or do you think that was just it was?
Oh yeah, no, 17 years old, they were recruiting me to be a staff member. That was why the love bombing was happening. They wanted me to work for the church, and what they wanted, they had a problem that they had to solve. They needed a particular post filled, and or job done, right? They call them posts in Scientology. And so they wanted me for that. And they wanted to send me down to LA to get this specialized training so I could come back and basically run the classrooms, is what they wanted me to do, be a course room supervisor. And they just pumped me up and fed my ego. And the thing about Scientology is that it's considered one of the more dangerous cults out there, not because of its size. It's tiny. It's a small group, right? It's about 30,000 members. It's not because of physical violence. That it happens in Scientology, but it's really pretty localized to the very, very, very top. I mean, as a regular course of events, Scientologists don't get beaten up or hit or violently treated. They get financially raped and ruined, but they don't get physically beaten on. That only happens at the upper levels, where I eventually worked. So instead, the reason why Scientology is considered so dangerous by cult experts is the sheer volume of control mechanisms that are baked into the subject, literally written into the DNA of it. An example, one of the more common and known examples is their practice of fair gaming people. Vindictively going after critics, in other words. That's what they call fair game. They label you are now fair game, right? Is how it used to go. They don't use this term anymore, but the practice is still done, where it's written in the organizational policies that a critic of Scientology should be ruined utterly. Hubbard literally says, ruin him utterly. This is done through legal machinations. Hubbard says the legal system he literally says the legal system is great to harass somebody with. And he suggested that if somebody starts coming after Scientology, you sue them. You have private investigators stalk them. You find out their secrets. You find out what they're hiding. You find out what crimes that person has committed, because Hubbard said that if there's somebody is criticizing Scientology, they've absolutely committed crimes for which they could go to jail. So the job of the private investigators or the investigators from within the church is to find those crimes. And of course, what happens with this kind of thing is if there are no crimes, they will just make them up, because there have to be crimes, right? Because Hubbard said only criminals attack Scientology. So if you're attacking Scientology, you must be a criminal. It's a tautology, right? It's circular. It has to be this way. So Scientologists will invent crimes that you've committed, right? And label you with them and call you out and try to ruin your reputation, ruin you socially. I mean, they really go all out against church critics or against people who they feel are a threat. This is a direct reflection of L. Ron Hubbard's personality written into the policies of the organization. So it's baked into the DNA of this group to act in a vengeful, vindictive way to critics. Yeah, it has. Yeah, I've got a hate website on me that's still up right now. And I've had various, personal attacks and stuff, and they've come after me in various ways. Not as badly as others. I mean, they haven't faked a bomb threat in my name. They did that to Paulette Cooper, right? They haven't, killed my pet. I have a cat. They haven't come around and killed my cat, but they've done that in the past, right? They've done some. Oh yeah. They'll go through your trash. They'll flatten your, they'll put holes in your tires. It's bullying, third grade level stuff. It's meant to harass and annoy and wear you down so that you stop attacking them. And they don't go after people legally so much anymore. They used to, but now Scientology has so many skeletons in its closet that they kind of feared discovery in a courtroom, right? And that, David Miscavige will not allow himself to be, deposed, right? He's terrified of courtrooms. So ever since the 1990s, they've really, I should say the 2000s, their legal fangs have sort of come off as far as them coming after you and suing you out of existence, which is the only reason I'm still around, really, because if they could do that, they would. But they've kind of chilled on a lot of that, and it's really been due to all of our exposure of this group over the last couple decades that they've been defanged that way. They used to get away with stuff that they could not now get away with because they weren't being exposed as what they were doing, So that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Okay. So after becoming a staff member, though, what was that like? Because I'm guessing that's the next level, I guess, in this hierarchy. Correct. Is a staff member. So you're I'm guessing that you went and you got the specialized training, you came back and you're overseeing like the courses or whatever at the church. So where did you go from there?
Yeah, eventually that happened. I went down to LA and I failed the first time. I spent 4 months down there, then came back a failure. I didn't get through the training. I didn't really have enough staff experience, right? And so I didn't really get how things worked. And that was also my first encounter with the Sea Organization, because I got sent down to LA to the Sea Org base. Now, the Sea Org, or the Sea Organization, is the next level up. And that's the final level of commitment and responsibility. And it is 24/7. The Sea Org is a paramilitary group with uniforms and ranks and ratings and yes sir, no sir, how high sir. And it's 24/7. You are totally committed. You live on a Sea Org base. You dress in Sea Org uniform. You eat Sea Org food that they feed you, and you're just dedicated. It's a monastic type of existence. It's not a job. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You're totally committed, and that's the billion-year contract. If you've ever heard of the billion-year, they have to sign a billion-year contract. The Sea Org is where that happened. The public aren't signing billion-year contracts. The staff aren't signing billion-year contracts. The staff, by the way, to be clear, do sign contracts, legally binding contracts of 2.5 or 5 years of commitment. And you have to sign that contract because you are formalizing your agreement with the Church of Scientology as a religious worker, basically a volunteer. So they want you signing that contract because you give up all your rights. There's no minimum wage. There's no paid vacations. There's no worker rights in Scientology. Everybody's classified as a religious volunteer, Sea Org and staff. And this is, again, baked into the contracts, right? It's all about protecting the church and taking your rights away from you. So as a staff member, you get free services in exchange for your time. And you get a stipend, a stipend. I never know how to say that word, but a little, you get some pocket change. It literally says in the contract, pocket change. That's what they, agree to pay you, right? And so I had weeks where you get paid every week, and I got paid as a staff member. The most I ever made in Santa Barbara in 8 years of being a staff member there was $150, right? That was my highest, 150, 175, something like that. That was my highest paycheck in all those years that I was there. There were weeks where I didn't make anything, and I had to have another job to support myself.
That was gonna be my next question. Like, there's no way you can live off that. What would you do? So, yeah, you basically had to have 2 jobs.
I worked at the library. I worked at a gaming store. I worked for a lawyer. I had lots of jobs that I had as secondary jobs. But the Scientology job was always the front and center important. To my way of thinking, having been sold on this, that we literally were saving the world, I was all in, and I was a true believer. And there really isn't any other way. There's no other excuse for me to use except to tell you I was a true believer. I was all in. I was young, I was naive, and I thought I was saving the world. And I am convinced that there is very few things more dangerous to the world at large than young, naive people who think they're saving the world. Because there is no such thing as saving the world. That's bullshit. The world doesn't need saving. Nobody's asking to save the world. That is a thought-stopping cliche. It's not a real goal. It's something you sell kids, and you get them to get to turn over their whole life. And lots of groups do this, and Scientology takes advantage of it. So I thought I was all in. And so this job, the job I was making no money at, was the top priority in my life. And the jobs that I was making money at, that were actually keeping me in a home, keeping me in, with food and clothes on my back, those were secondary importance. I was quitting them every few months. I didn't care about them. They didn't matter. It was only Scientology that mattered. Well, after 8 years of that, and it was a grind. It was a real grind because we weren't growing. We weren't expanding. The Scientology was not saving the world. It wasn't even saving my city. I was now living in Santa Barbara, California. And it was rough because Santa Barbara's an expensive place to live. It's kind of a lifestyles of the rich and famous kind of town. So it was not an easy existence. And I was constantly struggling. I was working 80 hours a week minimum. I was working all the time. The only time I had off was Saturday and Sunday nights. So this is very dedicated life. And I had the youth and the gusto and the energy to do it. But after 8 years, I was starting to get a little tired. I was like, Jesus, we're not growing. This isn't happening. And instead of correctly applying a little critical thinking and going, maybe this isn't everything it's cracked up to be, instead I go, nope, the problem's me. And I'm not committed enough, and I'm not responsible enough, and I'm not working hard enough. And so what I really need to do is I need to go join the Sea Org.
Oh,
and
wow.
That was the thought process, right? And so
Yeah.
in 1995, in summer 1995, I went down to LA and I started working in the Sea organization.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, because I thought, well, it never really occurred to me because of the years of it, very intense indoctrination that goes on in Scientology. And this is why I say, again, going back to that, trying to finish that original point of the number of control mechanisms in Scientology that are just baked into the subject are legion. Love bombing's a routine activity, but there's also, they redefine responsibility. They tell you that if you're critical of something or you're criticizing something, it's because you did something bad to the subject of your criticism. If I think you're a jerk, it's because I did something to you that you don't know about that was bad. It couldn't just be that you're a jerk. It can never be that. It's that it's on me. So it's a very introverting activity. It's all about, it's a blame the victim kind of mentality in Scientology. And there are no victims in Scientology. You don't get to be a victim, right? You have to be responsible. You're always responsible for every single thing that happens to you. Good or bad, right or wrong, up or down, you're responsible, right? You get hit by a car, you're responsible. You get sick, you're responsible, right?
I can just, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
I can just imagine
yeah.
It's like, oh, you got hit by a car? The fuck you do to that car? It's like, what?
Yeah, and well, there's a whole nother mechanism at play when you get hit by a car. You have an accident, you have bad things happen to you. There are more thought-stopping cliches. You are I'm just going to gloss over this stuff and not even bother explaining it, but you are PTS. You're a potential trouble source. You are being affected by a suppressive person or an SP. That's why you got hit by the car, because you did something to the SP that weakened your strength, and the SP was able to, have this karmic sort of influence on you, and bad things are now happening to you. It's that kind of thinking. I could spend hours discussing all this stuff and breaking it all down because it's really complicated. There's pages and pages of books and issues where Hubbard explains all this stuff in grim detail. And I bought into all of it because it sounded like it made sense. It was a way of explaining the world that sounded good. And if provided you don't think about it too much, it kind of works out. But it doesn't. None of it makes sense.
Right. And listen to you talk about how they treat their quote unquote volunteers and everything. When I was looking at the Scientology videos today that I was looking at, it made it seem like the organization was there for you to help you better yourself and all this other stuff. making it very important, like to you personally. But it seems to be, like we've discussed this entire conversation, a complete reversal of the actual situation's a complete reversal of that, because it just seems like they're using you to generate money or to get more people in. It's almost like a multi-level marketing kind of thing.
So in a way, it's not a pyramid scheme, and it's not MLM. MLM is kind of its own thing, but MLM is very culty, and of course, so is Scientology. They share a lot of the same mechanisms of control. Scientology markets itself to the public at large as a self-help, set of tools to give you a toolbox to get along in life and lead a better life, be cause over your existence, not effect, not the guy who's, receiving all the bad news. You're the one who's causatively making your life a positive, wonderful thing. That's the sort of spirit of Scientology. It's very, entrepreneurial even. I mean, it's not like you're starting a business, but that spirit of like, I'm on an adventure and this is going to be amazing. And these guys, this Church of Scientology is going to give you all these tools and methods, and they're going to then audit you. You're going to get this counseling. You're going to sit down with people one-on-one with this meter, and they're going to ask you all these different questions, and you're going to go through these processes of self-discovery and realization, and you're going to come to higher states of spiritual awareness. And you're going to come to a realization that you are not your body. You are a spiritual entity, which is called a thetan in Scientology. And you are a thetan. You are not your body. And you have lived before, and you will live again, and you will have countless numbers of lives in the future, just like you've had countless numbers of lives in the past. And that all those lives that you've had in the past have accumulated all this stress and trauma and mental baggage and emotional baggage. I mean, you've been around for millions and millions and millions of years. So imagine how many lifetimes of accumulated junk you've been carrying around with you. If you look at this lifetime that you're in right now and all the bullshit you have to go through and all the crap you carry around with you, all the emotional experiences and everything, the losses and the tribulations and the ups and downs of our lives, and you multiply that by about 1 trillion, that's you, right? That's what Scientology says. That's who you really are. You're this thetan, you're this spirit who is very traumatized. And Scientology is going to relieve that trauma.
Yeah, so that's taught at the public level, right?
That's all public level. I was telling you that to give you the idea of what's the attitude at the public level. It's all about rehabilitating you as a spiritual being and achieving your true potential and power and being cause in your life, right? Being in the driver's seat.
Right. So I mean, I guess I was specifying that because if I remember correctly, there are certain bits of information that are reserved for the higher levels of that. And I think we were about to get into that maybe a little bit with the Sea Org, because you in your story, we're now at the Sea Org, and you're working at the Sea Org. So what was that like?
Yeah, I have to clarify something here. I know this is all confusing. Like I said, this is a big subject, and I'm trying to keep it simple, but yeah, I know, man. And I probably am failing a little bit myself at this because we're randomly going here and there. But the 3 levels, the public, staff, Sea Org, those are levels of responsibility and commitment to the subject of Scientology. The experience of Scientology for anyone at any of these levels is that there is this chart. I'm sort of using my hands to demonstrate this, but there's this chart of levels. And every single Scientologist, whether public, staff, or Sea Org, is expected to climb this chart, these levels. And what these levels are is they are levels of indoctrination. They're not just knowledge, there's also experience. There's the spiritual levels of spiritual rehabilitation. You climb both. You're supposed to learn Scientology and you're supposed to do Scientology. You're supposed to receive counseling, the auditing. Every Scientologist is supposed to do this. The 3 levels are the levels of how you're going to go about doing it. As a public person, you pay for the services. And you just do your services, you do your time, and you pay the organization, and you're at the receiving end of a lot of pressure to give over as much money as you can constantly, because they want you for your money. The staff are the guys at the city level churches who are supposed to extract your money from you and deliver those services to you. They've now taken responsibility at a higher point to not only do Scientology themselves as individuals, but deliver Scientology to people. And so that's where they become more indoctrinated in policies and things that Hubbard wrote that the public wouldn't necessarily see. And the Sea Org is the ultimate commitment. And that's where you're all in. All you're going to do with your life is deliver Scientology to people, or somehow forward Scientology's goals and purposes. So I want to be clear about, okay, 3 levels of involvement or responsibility, but everybody's trying to do these services, the detox program, the auditing, going to this place called the state of clear, achieving this state of clear, which is the original promise of Dianetics. No more sickness, no more psychosomatic illness, genius level IQ. That's what clear is supposed to represent. And then on this chart, this bridge to total freedom that they call it, you have confidential levels above the state of clear. And that's where Xenu is. And that's where it's the South Park episode. That's where all that stuff is. It's the Sea Org delivers the confidential stuff. But everybody gets the confidential stuff eventually, right? If you climb that level. But the truth is, of course, only about 5% of Scientologists make it to that high up, make it to that level. Most Scientologists kick off way before they get to the confidential stuff, because it costs so much and it takes so much time. It takes years. You're not going to go in there and learn Xenu on day 2. You could walk in there and plop $1 million on the table, and they're still not going to give you Xenu on day 2. You got to climb those levels of indoctrination. And everybody's got to do the same steps in the same order. And Hubbard wrote this bridge and said, this is the path to spiritual immortality. And if you follow it, you'll get there. And you will be spiritually a god. You will become like a god. And that's the promise of Scientology. And that's kind of how it's organized, right? So there's 2 different things going on at the same time, but that's why it's a little complicated to explain. I've been working at this for a long time. I haven't figured out an easier way to explain it.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I pretty much understand it, because, I mean, you have to get to a certain point where they know that you're going to buy the bullshit that you're spilling to. Like, they have to know that you're going to buy Xenu in order to give you Xenu. So exactly. No, I think I completely understand the whole stepwise thing.
Cool. And of course, a very important and obvious point that I probably should have said is that as you progress through these levels of indoctrination, you are paying more and more and more money for the next level. And you're also told, a constant refrain is that if you did not achieve this miraculous result on the level you just did, well, that's only because you have to do the next level, right? The solution to your problems is always the next level, not we screwed up on the last level, or the last level doesn't work, or there's something wrong with the last level. Oh, you don't feel so great after paying $10,000 for 50 hours of Scientology auditing? Well, clearly what you need to do is, you finished level 2, so now I know you feel like horrible, but that's actually usual for people. They're supposed to kind of feel a little bad after level 2, because really what that does is it opens you up for level 3. And level 3 is where shit really gets real. So give me $50,000 and let's get you through level 3 and you're going to feel great, right? This is basically the sales pitch.
Right.
I'm bringing it down to its essence. When you get the sales pitch,
right,
it takes hours. You know what I mean? And they're love bombing you, and they're doing all this other stuff. But
so does level 3 really get real, or is it's still just bullshit, right?
It's still just more bullshit. See, that's the thing, it's just more bullshit. These levels are fantasies. They are, if you watch South Park and you see what they talk about in that episodes called Trapped in the Closet, and there's this whole Xenu narrative. That's only a little tiny part of what Scientology really consists of. They make it this big deal, oh my God, Xenu, the galactic overlord, and all this stuff. Well, most Scientologists don't even know about that. And when they do find out about it, it's totally hush hush and confidential, and they're never going to confirm or deny that's what you learn, because they sign contracts that are legally binding. They say, you're not, well, they're not totally legally binding, but they think they are, that keep their mouth shut. Right. And so people won't talk about that stuff, even within the church. I never heard the word Xenu in 27 years of being in Scientology, because I never got to that level.
So to be clear, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what level did you get to?
I got to clear.
Oh, you got clear?
I got to the state of clear. Yeah, I got to that level. And so I was supposed to have, no more illness, no more psychosomatic illness, no more, super IQ, all this other stuff. Well, obviously that didn't happen.
No, I was gonna say obviously, yeah, super IQ, you got it.
yeah, no, I don't think so, right? So so that's all bunk, and then there's the OT levels that you do after, and I didn't get to those levels, but they're all on the internet. I've read them all. I've talked to plenty of people who did do them, and I'm satisfied that what you see on the internet is a fairly accurate representation of what people are doing and paying money for. And South Park got it totally right. That what's in South Park is not a complete picture of Scientology by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a microscope to some of the crazy that exists within Scientology. Believe it or not, there are crazier things in Scientology than the Xenu story. There's a lot of cosmology in Scientology. There's a lot of history, as told by L. Ron Hubbard, about space and space opera civilizations and galactic battles and invader forces and things that happened right here on Earth. There's a lot. Hubbard goes into this stuff, but it's really kind of weird and random, and he contradicts himself in different places. So it's not like a complete whole picture. And that's one of the things that's so difficult about Scientology is it takes you years and years of study of Hubbard's materials and books and lectures to come to the conclusion that this stuff contradicts itself and it's not internally consistent, and it doesn't really work. But it takes you so long to figure that out, and you invest so much money and so much time that by the time you get to that point, you're like, oh my God, sunk cost fallacy times 1,000, right? And I guess maybe it's me. It's not the subject, it's me. Because it couldn't be that all these people are doing Scientology and it doesn't really work. That couldn't be. Look at all these happy, shiny, smiling people. It must be me, So people suck it up. Scientologists suck it up and they keep going. And that's how it works.
Right. So, but I'm wondering, like, after you got to the Sea Org, and I'm guessing, did you had to dress in the uniforms, and was it military for you, I guess?
Yeah, it was. It's paramilitary. It's Navy like. They have you enter in as a swamper, and then you become a I think petty officer, third class, and second class, first class, chief petty officer, and then you get into the officer ranks. So they have ranks and ratings, and they have very formalized systems. They have briefings all the time. There's a lot of indoctrination going on. These are 24/7 workers. It's a high pressure environment. The Sea Organization, I haven't found anything like the Sea Organization in all the years that I've been out. It's very difficult to compare it to something else. It's like if you had a bunch of, I guess if I could say, if you took a monastery, bunch of monks, right? People get that monks are dedicated people, that they've given their life over to their religion. So there's the baseline. There's the start point, is you get a bunch of people who have dedicated themselves to an ascetic, not glorious, not wonderful lifestyle. They're not going to get paid a whole lot. You make $50 a week as a Sea Org member. You're going to be working all the time, and you're okay with that. You go into that. That's what you know. What you don't know, and what they don't tell you at the beginning, and the lack of informed consent, is the fact that there are beatings, there are disciplinary actions where you are made to work scrubbing dishes, scrubbing stuff, cleaning things, whatever, scrubbing toilets with toothbrushes until 3 or 4 in the morning. Routinely. I mean, there were months that went by where I was getting 2 or 3 hours sleep a night. There was a very intense week where I think I got about 2 hours sleep in a 5-day period. It's very intense work schedule. It is I say 24/7. I'm not kidding. That's not a joke or an exaggeration. I could be sleeping in my dorm room, or, you know, when you get married, there's no premarital sex, so you have to get married to have sex with somebody, and so people get married and then they get their own room. You don't get an apartment, you get a room. That's your room, right? Otherwise, you're in a dorm with the guys or with the girls, right? And so you're married. That's the room you get, and they can come wake you up. You know, if something's flapping, if there's some emergency, and there are always emergencies in the Sea Org. It is the most emergency environment you can imagine, right? There's always red alarms going off. You know, they'll come knock on your door at 2, 3 in the morning. They don't care. You know, you got something they got to deal with. So off you get, you know, let's go, you know, and you're up and you're working. And it's all just madness. It's not like any of this stuff is doing anything. It's just busy work. It's just keep busy stuff. But Sea Org members take this stuff real seriously because they've bought into this concept that they're saving the world. So, you know, you get periods of beans and rice for food because they control your food, right? They're feeding you. There's a galley. Some Sea Org members are working in that galley making the food. I mean, that's a job that you have in the Sea Org. It's a very self-contained world. And so, you know, when you're only getting $50 a week, you buy food out of the canteen if the food in the galley isn't any good, and often it wasn't. I mean, their curry was like, I will never, ever eat curry again in my entire life because of the curry that the Sea Org fed me, right? Not to mention the runny eggs for breakfast and the bullshit food and stuff. It was awful. So sometimes you can go to the canteen and get some packaged food, but, you know, it's just as bad. And so anyway, it's just this existence that is not fun. And no one expects going into the Sea Org that they're going to be having a whole lot of fun, but they don't really understand the level of brutality of the disciplinary actions. And it gets really bad. The lack of sleep, the sleep deprivation is really bad. The food situation is really bad. And that's everybody. That's universal throughout the Sea Org. So everybody is tired all the time. Everybody is malnourished all the time. And then you add all this occult indoctrination on top of it. It's an environment that is rife for abuse. And the abuse comes out. The worst part of people, this is the Stanley Milgram experiment taken to the worst possible scenarios, right? Because this is not an experiment. Nobody's overseeing this. This is real. And people in this high pressure environment start treating each other really badly. And that's what happens there. And it becomes a sort of, oh God, what was that story about the kids on the island, the Lord of the Flies? You know, it can become really nasty sometimes. And it can become bad, you know? So that's the Sea Org. And the Sea Org is about 4,000 people at this point internationally. It's not a huge group. Too few people trying to do way too much work, and they're not pulling it off, and they end up abusing each other, and it's pretty nasty. And I was part of that group for 17 years. So I saw everything there was to see in the Sea Org, just about. And then I had to call it quits. I was done. I burned out big time, and I was done. And I left in 2012.
What caused you to burn out specifically? Was it just the constant grind, or was there was never like an ideological thing that caused you to be like, I'm done with this?
Actually, it was a number of things. It took me, sadly, I make no claims to intelligence or common sense. It took me 10 years to actually start figuring things out. The dots started connecting 10 years before I left. I've traced it back to that, right? There were things that started happening that were, I was just being pushed too far. There were things that happened that I just went, no. And I saw that the organization was hypocritical. That was the first thing, was I was seeing hypocrisies. I was seeing contradictions.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask, could you elaborate like on one of the things, one of the hypocrisies?
Yeah. I got sent down to San Diego. I was in church management. I should say that the Sea Org deals with church management, servicing public at the highest levels, the confidential stuff. The Sea Org does that. The Sea Org is responsible for all the dissemination and promotional materials of Scientology. Every video you've seen, every piece of information, the website, all of that is produced by Sea Org members. So there's lots of different jobs. They're also managing all the churches, all the city level churches. They give them instructions and orders. They're not, all the city level churches are not independently operating activities. They are being run by the Sea Org. The Sea Org tells them what to do. So that became my job for a while. And I got sent down to San Diego to do a recruitment project to get a bunch of auditors recruited for the San Diego church, the organization down there. And I spent about 3 weeks down there, and we did this amazing, miraculous project where we actually recruited 20 auditors, which was unheard of. I mean, at the time we did this was like in 2002, I think. And it was a very successful project. And I come back to LA and no one cares. And in fact, the way I went about doing that project, I wrote it all down so we could repeat the feat and do this all over and expand like crazy. And wouldn't this be amazing? And this is what I thought we were supposed to be doing. It was expanding, right? And growing Scientology, making it bigger. And instead, I come back to LA and it's like I'm in the doghouse, and it's like no one cares. And I do this whole write-up of all the things we did, and that gets canceled. No one cares, you know? And it's all about mantras. They're going, no, don't do what Shelton says. Do what Ron says, and apply and play. There's a phrase. I can't explain all this stuff, but play the birthday game. This is a thing that Hubbard came up with. It's a game to incentivize expansion and make people want to work harder. And it's a mantra. Play the birthday game. Play the birthday game. Play the birthday game. That's it. That's just a mantra. It doesn't really tell you to do anything. I had specific this. We did this. We did this. We did this. We sent out this much promo. We talked to this many people. We made this many phone calls. Like, I really broke it down. I wanted to repeat this activity in all of the churches. And I was stopped. And I was told by senior executives, not David Miscavige, I was never in touch with him directly this way, but by senior people in middle management, they canceled all my stuff. And they said, no, we're not doing that. And I realized at that moment, hey, wait a second. Are we about getting stuff done, or are we about mantras? Well, apparently we're only about mantras. That was the beginning of the end right there. Now that, again, 10 years from that moment, I'm leaving. But it took me 10 years to break down all the indoctrination of a lifetime that had built up to that point. That's why it took me so long, but that was the beginning. And it's stuff like that happened over and over again. And the intense concentration on money ramped up through the 2000s to a degree I had not even seen. And Scientology was always about money. But now it was just crazy balls money. I mean, they were just going crazy about it. And the quotas that were coming down and the pressure that we were getting, it was literally crazy making. People were going a little nuts. And I watched that happen. I don't want any part of that. And so I managed to get myself on other jobs that didn't have to do with that. I was kind of good at that. I was kind of good at getting around in the organization that way. Somehow I just figured that out. And I couldn't even explain it to you. It was just kind of this thing I could do. I'm not talking about supernatural nonsense. I just mean you learn the ropes. You learn how things work, and you figure out how to make your way. That's what I was doing, right? So I got away from the money stuff. But it bothered me. I was like, Jesus, the whole organization. I mean, people were getting in trouble. People were up until 4 a.m, calling Hawaii, trying to get people to give them money, and it was just money, 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 money. And I didn't join Scientology to make money. It wasn't what I was there to do, right? And then you started hearing rumors in the late 2000s about physical beatings and David Miscavige beating on people. And I had been beaten on before that, but I never imagined that David Miscavige was beating on people. He was the ecclesiastical leader. He's the guy. He's the man. He's the bee's knees. He's the guy we all looked up to. He's beating on people? What? Right? Like, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. but it was being reported. And at first I ignored it. I thought it was lies. It was easy to ignore that kind of stuff. And especially in the Sea Org environment where the information is so controlled. And so I denied it. I wouldn't let myself think about it until the final straw. So between the 10-year thing here is slowly building, doubts are slowly building. And then finally, a very senior Scientologist who had left the Sea Org, her name was Debbie Cook, wrote an extensive email with lots of L. Ron Hubbard quotes from his policies, breaking down in detail how off the rails the organization had gone and how David Miscavige was leading Scientology off a cliff. And I read that email as a Sea Org member, and I couldn't disagree with a single thing it said. And I went, it's time for me to seriously take a look at what I'm doing with my life. And I was 42 years old at this point. And I was like, half my life had been dedicated to this, the good half, right? The important half, the adult half, actually 2/3 maybe of my life. And I'd been around the subject since I was 4. So, and I wasn't having doubts at that moment about Scientology as a subject. I was having doubts about the organization and David Miscavige. So I left the Sea Org. It took me 9 months. It was a long process. They don't want you to leave. They try to discourage you. They try to slow you down. But I persevered. And by December 2012, I was out. 2 months later, 2, 3, actually, realistically, probably about 4 or 5 months later, I'd gone down the internet rabbit hole because now I had free and complete internet access. And I didn't have that when I was a Sea Org member. And that was that was where I learned everything. That all the stuff I've been telling you in this episode, I learned it all there, right? I learned all the lies that I'd been involved in. Hubbard's pathological lies I learned were lies. I didn't know about his war record. I didn't know he'd failed out of college. I didn't know that he had 3 wives, not 2. 2 of them at the same time for a year, right? I didn't know any of that, right? His second wife is completely written out of existence in Scientology's world. If you go to the lronhubbard.org site or the Scientology materials and you look for his second wife, you will find no mention or record of her at all. You won't even find mention of his first wife, but at least they'll acknowledge he had a first wife, right? There is no second wife. And I mean, Hubbard was a bigamist. Hubbard was a liar. Hubbard was a drug user. Hubbard was an alcoholic. Hubbard had all kinds of physical problems that he never fessed up to publicly. He was saying that he could cure leukemia with Dianetics, and yet he couldn't even cure himself. It's like, come on. And then he never had any wounds in the first place from the war. I mean, so many of his stories turned out to be total horseshit. And I had spent decades learning this stuff, right? I thought I was part of something incredible and special and amazing. No, I wasn't. I was part of bullshit. And I can't even, even to this day, I tell people, I describe this story, I lay it out, and I go, I still don't have the words to tell you what it's like to have it dawn on you that 27 years of your life, you were a pawn on a chessboard that you didn't know existed. You were being moved around and you didn't even know that there was a hand there. You thought all the decisions you were making were yours. You thought you were doing something that you were not doing at all. It's almost as bad as, it's not as bad, but it's almost as bad as, finding out that I don't know, you're a Navy, you're an accountant for somebody that you thought was a stand-up guy, like, Jeffrey Epstein or something. And then you find out the guy's a complete pedophile, right? And you're like, holy shit, what have I been doing with my life, right? Like, how is this even possible that I could be this fool, that I could have been this conned, and that my parents could have been this conned, because that's where it started. How could this happen? How could this be? And how could somebody do this to somebody else? How could they? How could somebody, where could somebody stand on what kind of moral compass could somebody have that they could purposefully, premeditatively, knowingly use people this way? It's fucked up, and it's sociopathic stuff. And that's when you find out, that Hubbard was not just some lying guy or just a con man. The man was a megalomaniac and a sociopath, and so was David Miscavige, the guy who took over for him. So that's what you get. And that was rough, that was rough finding that out. And that impelled me to start speaking out. So 7 years later, here we are having this conversation.
Like, what was the reaction to, like, from your parents, or I don't know if you had friends that were still in Scientology? Like, what was their reaction when you left?
Well, okay, so you know that critics of Scientology are not treated well by Scientologists. I was furious, to say the least. But I was also still connected with Scientologists. My entire life was surrounded by Scientologists. I had now moved out of, and I'd left the Sea Org, so I was no longer in Los Angeles in the big blue buildings. That's where I was for all those years. So I had moved out to Minnesota. I had friends out there, Scientologist friends. I had a woman out there that I wanted to be with. I had divorced my wife. I was in the process of divorcing my wife from the Sea Org. I'd been married in the Sea Org, but I left her behind because when I left, she didn't want to leave. She was still all in. I was the bad guy, right? So I leave. I start treated like a bad guy, even though I haven't really done anything wrong except leave the Sea Org. So I'm a second-class citizen in the world of Scientology. But I have these friends, and I'm trying to make this relationship happen, and that sort of thing. And then I learn on the internet, oh my God, this is all a lie, and I got to keep it in. I got to suck it up because all these people around me are still true believers. They're all in. And if I go ranting to them about how it's all bullshit, they're not going to listen to me. They're going to tell me I'm the one who's wrong, right? I'm the bad guy. So I'm like suddenly between a rock and a hard place. I'm like, oh shit, what do I do, right? So I try to play along, but inside I'm exploding and I need an outlet. I have got to get this out of me somehow. I had two avenues. My parents had already left Scientology, divorced. So they were separated, had remarried non-Scientologists, people who had never been involved in Scientology. They were totally out. So they'd gotten out before me, but they were not publicly critical of the church. They never said a word. They never got on the internet. They never made comments. They never did any of that. They just faded out of that, right? And that's the safe way to do it. Me, I was pissed.
Right? You're like, I went a different direction.
I did because well, as you can tell, listening to me, I'm a talker, right? I don't have a problem talking, and catharsis is important to me. I needed something, so I'm talking to my mom almost every day, downloading to her, bitching to her, having her confirm stuff for me because she had done those OT levels, she had done the Xenu stuff. So I was talking to her about that openly because between her and me, it wasn't super confidential and all that because she was out and I suddenly found out this is all bullshit. So I wanted to know everything. And so I was talking to her. I talked to my dad a bit, but it really wasn't enough. I needed, to vent. And I got online and I found some chat forums and some sites where ex-Scientologists would congregate and bitch and moan about Scientology and share their experiences. And I anonymously, I made up a sock account and I got on there and I started bitching. And I tried to not say anything personal enough about me because I also learned that Scientology monitors those sites. They watch those people. They pay attention to who is saying what. And they keep files on these people and they try to figure out who's who. I mean, it's crazy, the paranoia in Scientology. I had no idea that there were people in the church that I worked side by side with. There were people whose jobs were to monitor criticism on the internet, and they don't talk about it. You don't hear about it. So I didn't know that people were doing that. Not a lot of people, but there were people who do that. And so I had to be careful. I learned I had to be careful. And so I tried to not say too much about myself, but of course, in my sound and fury, I said too much. And long story short, they figured out who I was. I tried to appease them and make up with the church and say, look, I don't believe in it anymore, but I don't want to make trouble. I don't want to be disconnected. I don't want to be shunned, right? They call it disconnect. I didn't want that. I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to maintain all my friends and relationships and stuff, right? And the church basically said, yeah, too bad. And they disconnected me. And so because I had done what I had done. And so they weren't interested in that. And so I was labeled a suppressive person, which is their big bad guy label. And I was disconnected. I was shunned.
Yeah, that's probably synonymous with apostate. with
Yes,
the
it's along the
JWs.
same lines. A suppressive person in Scientology is actually a thing. It's a formal label that Hubbard came up with to classify someone as a true enemy of mankind. Scientology doesn't just think of me as an enemy of Scientology. They think of me as an enemy of mankind.
Shit.
Yeah. That's a suppressive person, right? It's like a serial killer or something. That's that's a suppressive person. And of course, you wouldn't want to be connected with anybody like that. So, when the church labels you, they then tell all their parishioners, you can't talk to that person anymore. It's up. No more Facebook friends, no more connection, sever it. And we're talking no more postcards, no more phone calls on the holidays, nothing. And it doesn't matter if you're a son or a daughter or a father or a mother or a business partner or anything. The connection, the type of connection doesn't matter. When the church says you disconnect, that is absolute.
Right.
And that's how Scientology rips up families, and that's how they destroyed my relationship with my fiance at the time, her whole family, friends that I had had for 20 years, gone overnight.
Wow. That must have been really devastating.
No, it was huge. It was definitely not fun. And that was December 2013. So it took a year for me to leave the Sea Org, it took about 5 months for me to stop being a Scientologist. And it took me a year to get declared a suppressive person. And once I was declared, all bets are off. I'm not a Scientologist anymore. I don't have to follow any of your stupid rules. And I've been a free agent ever since. And I've been speaking out and doing my thing and being an actual human being for the last 7 years. And it's been awesome. I got married. I have a wonderful relationship with my parents. I now have a relationship with my son who lives on the other side of the world. He was born and raised in Australia. I didn't know him the entire time I was in Scientology because my mission to Scientology was more important. His mother raised him in Australia.
Oh, wow.
I mean, there's a lot of backstory here, but I gave up everything for Scientology, and I lost. I lost big time. It was not a winning bet. And so now I've spent the last 7 years first talking about Scientology for the purposes of catharsis and exposure of their abuses. I'm not trying to destroy Scientology. I like Scientologists. I don't have a thing against individual Scientologists. It's an abusive, high control group, and that's what needs to stop. We can laugh all day about Xenu and stuff, but I don't really care about their beliefs. Their beliefs are silly, and they're as silly as Catholicism or Christianity or Islam. I mean, all these beliefs are pretty silly. That's not why Scientology is dangerous. Scientology is dangerous because it's a cult and because they create mindsets in people that are extremist mindsets. I would have taken a bullet for David Miscavige, and I probably would have gone out and done some pretty horrible things to people if I was told to, when I was a Scientologist and a Sea Org member, when I was really all in. Once I started having doubts and stuff, I don't think I would have gotten into that stuff. But there was a period of time where I was as true believer as it comes. And I never went and beat anybody up, and I did not engage in credit card fraud, and I did not rip people off knowingly. I actually maintained a bit of a moral compass while I was there. But I saw and was aware of the fact that there were people who were not. And I didn't step up, and I didn't report it to law enforcement, and I didn't even think to, because I was so in that mindset that it didn't even occur to me to do things that the outside world would go, duh, of course you should report this to the law. Of course you should. When people beat up on you, maybe you should report it to the police. Nah, yeah, it's par for the course. Well, I deserved it. I had it coming. So.
Well, now I generally ask this of people that I talk to. What's the big difference between you now and you while you were a Scientologist? I know that this entire thing has been about, how you've gotten out of it and how you're different now, but I'm just, from your own perspective, like, how different are you now than when you were like a Scientologist?
The basic me has always been me. I don't have a pre-cult personality to fall back to. I've always been around Scientology. That's the thing about second gens, is there is, when you go into a cult, you go in usually in your 20s or 30s. You have a pre-cult personality. You formed your own self as you develop. Second gens don't. So we were always in that mindset. So I have now still have a very strong desire to help people. It's what impels me now to do what I do, because I've done the recovery thing. Like I'm pretty recovered. To this day, I still have I shouldn't say that, because to this day I still have crap come up from the Scientology mindset that has to be dealt with. I've had to deal with emotional issues. I've had to deal with emotional suppression was a big thing. So now, I was more of an automaton when I was in Scientology. I didn't allow myself to feel certain things. I didn't allow myself to experience emotions in a healthy way. I didn't even understand what that meant. To me, in Scientology, dealing with emotions in a healthy way meant suppressing them, right? Because I got a job to do, and I can't be sitting here crying about my, worries or being upset about things. I don't have the time for that. So just suppress it. Took years to undo that. And now I can experience emotions, and I do. Now I'm able to think of things. I can think of whatever I want. I've educated myself on a ton of stuff with science and psychology and sociology and neurology. I've been knee deep in this stuff for years now, and it's been wonderful, because I've been learning that Hubbard's bullshit was an explanation for what they were doing. But now I have reframed everything from a psychological, sociological, neurological point of view, and I see things very, very differently as to what's going on in Scientology, and I see myself very differently as a result. I used to believe I was a Thetan. I used to think I was this advanced spiritual entity. Now I know that's bunk. I don't think that about myself anymore. I used to think that spirits existed. Now I'm like, show me the evidence, right? I'm not saying spirits don't exist. I'm saying, if you're going to tell me spirits exist, you better show me a spirit, better show me something, right? It can't be subjective. It can't all be in my head. That's not proof of anything. So I've really adopted the most fortunate thing that happened to me in 2013 when I was coming out was quite literally stumbling on Carl Sagan and skeptic.com and Penn and Teller and James Randi, and learning about this newfound subject that I'd never heard of before in 42 years of my life, called critical thinking. And needless to say, it was a doozy learning about that, right? Because in Scientology, the word critical, like I mentioned earlier, I briefly touched on something that is actually quite big in Scientology. If you're critical, you've got sins, overts, bad deeds, right? As they call them, overts. You've done bad things. I've eschewed all of that. That's all bullshit. I got rid of all of that thinking, right? If you're critical of something and it's justified and you can make a good argument, you should be critical of it, right? And so I've developed logical thinking and some skill set with that, and learning about that stuff and talking about it and trying to educate people about it. That's where I've gone now. So it's sort of a polar opposite in many, many ways. I'm pretty down on organized religion, but I am very tolerant of belief. I do not get down on people for what they want to believe. It's not my business. I don't care what goes on in your head. Why should I? What business is it of mine? I got enough to deal with what's going on in my head. Why should I care about what's going on in yours, right? But if you think you can abuse people, especially children, because of your beliefs, I'm going to have something to say about that.
Right.
And that's what my channel's been about for the last 7 years. It's been about exposing abusive behavior, not weird belief systems, and I'm not into debating people. And I know that there are people who are, and I don't have a beef with that. I got nothing on that. I think that it's perfectly fine to point up the quibbles and nonsense in Christianity or Islam or any of this stuff, because there's a lot of illogical nonsense in it. But faith isn't based on logic, so it doesn't really break anything down too much for people that way. So I'm tolerant of belief, but I am intolerant of abusive behavior and extremism. And having lived in an extremist lifestyle, having been in an extremist mindset, having subjective understanding of what that's like, and coming all the way out of that, and then looking at things from a more rational, hopefully rational point of view, and also recognizing that we lie to ourselves a lot about our rationality. We lie, all of us, at all ends of every political and philosophical spectrum. We're biased, and learning about all that stuff, and being honest about it. And I try now to just be honest about how silly we all are.
No, I think that's very good. And
Yeah.
to wrap up the interview, I'm wondering. I don't know if there's going to be like any Scientologists that would watch this at all or even get to this point. But I mean, what kind of advice would you give to anybody that is like one of the public that hasn't completely bought into it, or maybe somebody that's like considering leaving, like in any kind of stage? Like, what kind of advice would you give them?
Okay, great question. Scientology, basically, you don't have to take my word for any of what I've said here during this video. Every single thing I've said is documented. You can look up Hubbard's war records. You can look up Hubbard's college transcripts. You can look up pictures of his second wife. You can see in documented form everything, every claim I've made here. None of this is just off the cuff, me making stuff up. So don't take my word for it. Go do your own research. Go look this stuff up yourself. You owe it to yourself to know the truth about what you're involved in. I am not a source of truth. I'm a guy who was a Scientologist who had some pretty bad experiences with it and who is sharing my experiences. My experiences are my experiences, so I can only give them to you and give them as much validity as you're willing to give it. But there are facts out there. There are undisputed, undeniable facts out there that you can look up, you can find, and you can come to your own conclusions about Scientology. And that is what I encourage anyone and everyone to do. And if you're on the fence about it, especially, take the time. You owe it to yourself to do that, because Scientology is, at the end of the day, about money. And anybody who's in Scientology for any length of time kind of knows that, because the pressure at the reg, right, the salespeople, it's intense. They're very, very earnest people, and they want your money. You know, and at that level, they're not aware of the fact that they're lying to you. So I'm not asserting to you that the entire thing is a knowing con job. It's worse, because it's believers selling people and making them into believers. And believers are not, that's not truth. It's belief. It's different. So look into it for yourself and figure it out. And I think you'll come to some interesting conclusions for yourself.
Now, do you think that any Scientologist would listen to that and like actually do like your suggestions?
Not after I told you I was a suppressive person. They kind of clicked off at that point. But the fact of the matter is, no Scientologist is really going to watch this. I mean, unless they're already on the fence, like I was, right? That's when you get into this stuff, and that's cool, and that's fine. And I know it, and it's baby steps. And so it's very possible that Scientologists on the fence will check this out. And if they do, then, I'm more power to them. Keep going. Knowledge is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with knowing things. And Scientology is about knowing how to know, right? That's what Hubbard says. And it's the science of certainty. So might as well be sure that what you're getting into is what you think you're getting. Nobody joins a cult. Nobody thinks that they're getting involved in something that's going to con them out of things. Nobody thinks that ever. Why would they? Of course, people think that what they're involved in is the true, good, right, wonderful thing. Those are our biases,
Well, so have you ever had an experience where, like, in the 7 years since you've left, have you ever swayed somebody out of like being a Scientologist?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have. I've received many emails, many communications from people, Facebook messages, etc. Met people in person at conferences or in other places who have told me that I helped get them out of Scientology or whatever other destructive cult they were involved in. I've actually helped people out of JWs, other culty groups, Indian cults, Christian cults and stuff. But yes, I have definitely been contacted by friends of Scientologists, family of Scientologists, and directly by ex-Scientologists who told me that my work was either helpful and in a couple cases actually crucial to their leaving. So I know I've done that job, and I'm very happy about that.
That's good. I'm really glad. One of the I guess you could say mantra that I have is to stand up and use your voice. And I'm really glad that you have taken so much time after leaving Scientology to do exactly that. Because, you know, as you said, you've really made a difference. And I think everybody that stands up and uses their voice, you know, against these types of subjects really does make a difference. And we just all have to do it. So I'm glad that I'm glad that you are. So
thank you very much, and I'm glad you are. You know, because I know you take these things on too, and we need more of us out there, because this is a world of crazy, man. There is some like goofy ideas out there, political ideas,
definitely.
religious ideas. I mean, you know, and these extremist high control groups are not just religious groups, and they're not all just a bunch of kooky robe wearing, you know, yes sir, no sir, nutty activities. I mean, MLMs, business opportunities, martial arts dojos, sports clubs. There are extremist activities in all sectors of life. And it really behooves all of us to understand this stuff and know it. And you and me and everybody in our community is really trying to propagate some objective truth out there. And I'm happy to be part of it. I just feel my voice is one of many in this chorus of, hey guys, let's think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I am just but one voice, regardless of how many people actually watch me. You know, I think the important thing to focus on is actually, you know, saying something, like actually do it, you know, expressing yourself and, you know, the things that you used to believe, which are now false. Kind of thing. Like, that's where I come from. I know that you really want to sort of expose the abusiveness of like the Scientology and everything. And I gotta tell you, I had like the whole cult idea. I thought that was like years ago. I thought that was like one of those just crazy things that never really happened and all this other stuff. But, you know, ever since you, as well as Telltale Atheist, and even Genetically Modified Skeptic, you know, all of them exposing all of this really opened up, like, you know, that the cult kind of mentality that exists in just about every facet of life. So, I mean, I really appreciate you standing up and using your voice, and everybody else that is, because I see it on Twitter all the time. I know we interacted a good bit on Twitter, you know, tackling bad ideas and having these deep, you know, kind of arguments. So I'm really glad to see people are actually standing up, using their voice, and doing all that. Do you have any like final thoughts or anything that you want to leave the audience with?
Awesome. Thanks, man. First off, thank you for this opportunity to do this. And we've gone over what we planned on doing, and that's par for the course for Scientology. So I'm not surprised at all. And I want to say that I want to thank everybody for watching this long and this far into it. It's a fascinating topic. There is a lot to know. If you are interested, I've written a whole book on it. It's not my memoir. It's an actual analysis of Scientology. So you can check that out. But the thing I really would like to leave people with is, you know, at the end of the day, you have to make your own decisions about this stuff. And you owe it to yourself to give yourself the best opportunity to know how to look at stuff. And that's critical thinking. And that is learning about, you know, reasoning and objectivity and sort of, you know, the illusion of objectivity that we all think we have. And, you know, and learn and taking some time to learn about this stuff. It is time consuming. I know I've been doing it full time for years, and I know not everybody has that opportunity. So we try to share the biggest benefits of what we've learned and through our videos and stuff. So take the time to please, you know, look through my channel, look through all the channels that are out there in the atheist skeptic community, and see what's out there, because there are resources that can help you with your day-to-day life that are not culty, that do not cost you any money, that do not require pledges of loyalty or commitment or disciplinary actions if you don't do it. You know, you don't have to engage in any of that crap to have some wisdom and have a better life. So that's if there's any lesson I would like to get across to people, it's that, you know, is don't subjugate yourself, allow yourself to be subjugated. or live under somebody else's thumb, whether it's a narcissistic relationship or a cult or or a high control group or whatever words you want to use to describe it. Be your own person and live your own life on your terms. And the best way I know to do that is to understand what's going on around you. And I don't know any other way to accomplish that except critical thinking.
I totally agree with you. But everybody, if you want to, go down below. All of his links are down there. All of Chris's links are down in the description. Definitely subscribe to him. He's got a great channel over there. Check him out. Check out his book. I didn't know that you had a book, so now I've got to go buy your book.
Oh yeah, actually, since we're here, I really need to get better at pimping my work. I am so horribly awful at it. But this is my book, and it's available on Amazon. It's an audiobook, ebook, or this format, and it's $20. And it's a critical analysis of Scientology. My story is chapter 1, just to establish who I am and where I've been. The rest of it, how did they get tax exemption? Who's L. Ron Hubbard? What do Scientologists really believe? What's Dianetics? What's Scientology? What's the difference? And 3 chapters at the end on recovery from the whole experience. So, pretty. I of course think it's a pretty good book. And I've been told by people who read it that they really get Scientology afterwards, and they didn't get it before. So that's what that's there for.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, trust me, I'm very interested in this because I'd love to know as much as I can about Scientology because I have no idea. I still have a lot of questions, like what the fuck is ARC and what are the 7 dynamics or whatever. All of these other things. So I'm definitely gonna have to read into your book. Awesome. But everybody, Chris, his links are down below. Like I said, subscribe to him, get his book, everything like that. Everybody, if you will, leave a comment down below. We would love to hear what you think about this particular interview. What do you think about Scientology? Just let us know down in the comments. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like interviews like this. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.